Jack stood at the edge of the grand hall, trying to blend in with the other members of the peacekeeping delegation. The room was filled with diplomats, each one wearing ornate clothing and speaking in a language Jack had only begun to understand. The Xylorians, a proud and powerful species, had invited humans to their world for this peace summit. Jack, being one of the few human soldiers assigned to the mission, had spent most of his time trying not to draw attention. He wasn't much for fancy events, especially ones that felt like a performance. He'd much rather be back on the field, doing what he knew best. But there he was, standing in a room full of high-ranking Xylorian officials, trying to look composed. The humans had come to strengthen the fragile alliance between the Xylorians and their neighboring races, but Jack wasn't sure how much of this diplomacy would lead to anything more than more talks and handshakes as he surveyed the room. His eyes landed on her Lyra. She stood by a group of other diplomats, speaking in a soft voice that only added to her aura of mystery. Jack had noticed her the moment they'd arrived on Xyloria, but it wasn't just her beauty that caught his attention. There was something about the way she carried herself, a kind of nervousness in her posture that seemed out of place among such confident individuals. He caught her glancing at him from across the room. Their eyes met for a split second, and then, just as quickly, she looked away. Jack felt an odd flutter in his chest. He'd spent most of his life surrounded by soldiers, and Xylorians weren't exactly known for being shy or awkward. But there, she was standing in the middle of the room, looking like she might disappear into the ground. Curiosity got the best of him. Jack didn't often approach people he didn't know, but something about her nervousness intrigued him. He took a few steps toward her, weaving through groups of people engaged in conversations. As he got closer, he realized that his heart was racing. He wasn't sure why, but something about the situation felt different. "Hello," Jack said, his voice steady despite the growing anxiety in his chest. Lyra turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise. For a moment she didn't say anything, and Jack couldn't help but notice how her cheeks turned a soft shade of pink. She quickly looked away, as if trying to hide the blush from him. Jack wasn't sure why, but the sight of her blushing made him feel even more nervous than he already was. "Hi," she finally replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect you to speak to me." Jack smiled, trying to ease her discomfort. "Why not? I'm just a soldier, same as everyone else here." Lyra hesitated, then glanced around the room. "You're different," she said, almost to herself. "You don't belong with the others." Jack raised an eyebrow, slightly confused. "In what way?" "Not like the other soldiers here," she explained, her voice growing quieter. "You don't act the same? You seem more... open." Jack wasn't sure how to respond to that. "I guess I'm just trying to do my job," he said with a shrug. What's your role in all this?" Lyra seemed to take a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I'm a diplomat," she said, her gaze shifting nervously to the ground. "It's my job to ensure the peace talks go smoothly." Jack noticed how her fingers fidgeted with the fabric of her robe. The nervous energy around her was almost palpable. "Sounds like an important job." Lyra nodded but didn't seem convinced. "It is, but sometimes I wonder if I'm the right person. For it, I'm not like the others." Jack could sense her discomfort, but he wasn't sure how to help. He didn't know much about Xylorian culture, but it seemed clear that being a diplomat was a serious position for someone like Lyra. And yet, here she was, a young, beautiful alien, acting more like an unsure teenager than a seasoned professional. "Well," Jack said, trying to keep the conversation going. "I'm sure you're doing fine. I'm sure everyone here trusts you." Lyra gave him a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I don't think so," she murmured, before Jack could ask what she meant. Lyra suddenly turned away from him, excusing herself from the conversation. He stood there for a moment, unsure of what just happened. He was left with an overwhelming feeling that there was more to this encounter than he could see. It was rare for Jack to feel out of place or uncertain in any situation, but with Lyra, he wasn't sure where this strange pull came from. Her nervousness, the way she avoided his gaze, but still seemed to be watching him. There was something deeper at play, something he wasn't ready to understand. As the evening went on, Jack found himself looking for Lyra in the crowd. Every time he spotted her, she was surrounded by Xylorian diplomats, her face composed once. Again. But every now and then, when their eyes met across the room, Jack saw that same brief flicker of nervousness in her expression. It left him with a strange feeling, a feeling that this peace summit might have more surprises in store than he could have ever imagined. The next few days felt different for Jack. He kept finding himself glancing over at Lyra during the peace talks, wondering if she would notice him again. She always seemed to be surrounded by a group of Xylorian diplomats, her posture perfect, her expression neutral. Yet every so often, when their eyes met, Jack saw that same nervous look on her face, the slight blush creeping up her cheeks. It was hard to ignore. During one of the breaks between the sessions, Jack decided to approach her again. He found her near the edge of the hall, standing alone by a window, gazing out at the starry sky above Xyloria. The view was breathtaking, but Jack's attention was on her. She looked so peaceful, so lost in her thoughts. Her back was to him, but Jack could feel an odd pull to her, as if she was waiting for him to make the first move. "Mind if I join you?" Jack asked, his voice calm but a little unsure. Lyra turned, her eyes widening when she saw him standing there. For a moment she seemed unsure of what to say. Jack could see the way her hands clenched slightly as though she was trying to control her nerves. "Of course," she replied softly, a slight smile tugging at her lips. They stood there for a moment, both of them staring out at the stars. The quiet between them was comfortable, but Jack could tell something was on Lyra's mind. Her fingers were once again fiddling with the fabric of her robe, a clear sign of her unease. "Are you all right?" Jack asked, his voice softer this time. Lyra glanced at him quickly, her face flushing again. I'm fine," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "just thinking." Jack couldn't help but notice how beautiful she looked in that moment, standing there with the stars in the background. Her dark hair framed her face perfectly, and her delicate features seemed almost too perfect to be real. But there was more to her than just her appearance. He could sense that she was struggling with something that had nothing to do with her position as a diplomat. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked, leaning against the window beside her. "If you don't mind me asking?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, and Jack wondered if she would open up. She had seemed so guarded before, but now there was something in her eyes that made him believe she might say something important. I don't belong here," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never have." Jack was taken aback by her words. "What do you mean?" he asked. "You're a diplomat. You've got this whole thing under control." Lyra shook her head, the weight of her words heavy in the air. "It's not about control," she said, her voice trembling again. "It's about who I am. I was born into this role, expected to follow the rules, to do everything by the book. Okay. But I'm not like them, Jack. I'm not like the others. And I can't keep pretending I am." Jack felt a pang of sympathy for her. He had never felt the pressure of being born into a role he couldn't escape. But he understood the feeling of wanting to be more than what others expected. He knew what it was like to want to break free. "You don't have to pretend," Jack said quietly. "You can be who you are, no matter what anyone else expects." Lyra looked at him then, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "But that's the problem," she said, her voice breaking. "If I'm not the perfect diplomat, if I don't follow the rules, I'll lose everything. My family, my position, my future, everything will be gone." Jack took a step closer to her, wanting to comfort her, but unsure of how to do so. He had always been good with words when it came to orders, but this was different. This wasn't a mission. This was about a personal errand. She was in pain. "I don't think you'll lose everything just because you're not what they want." "You too be," Jack said softly. "But I understand if you're scared. Change is hard." Lyra looked down at her hands, clearly torn. "I've never told anyone this before," she said, almost to herself. "Not even my closest friends know how I feel. They all see me as this perfect diplomat, this symbol of Xylorian success. But inside I'm breaking." Jack didn't know what to say. It was clear that Lyra was carrying a heavy burden. She was trapped in a life she hadn't chosen, expected to be something she wasn't. For the sake of her people and her family's reputation. I just want to be free, Lyra whispered, so softly that Jack almost didn't hear her. What? To make my own choices, even if they go against everything I've been taught. Jack was silent for a moment, thinking. He knew that feeling. The desire to break free. The need to live life on your own terms, even if it meant taking risks. This was different. Lyra wasn't. Just defying personal expectations, she was defying the laws of her entire species. He wanted to say something, to reassure her that everything would be okay, but he couldn't. Not yet. There were too many unknowns. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the Xylorian technology in the distance, and the distant whisper of the wind outside. Finally, Lyra turned to Jack, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. There's something I need to ask. You, Jack. Something impossible. Jack's heart skipped a beat. What is it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. But Lyra didn't answer right away. She looked away, taking a deep breath, clearly gathering her courage. Jack could see the weight of what she was about to ask hanging in the air. Whatever it was something that would change everything. And in that moment, Jack realized that whatever it was, he was ready to listen. Jack couldn't stop thinking about what Lyra had said. There was something about her words, her vulnerability, that had stuck with him. She had confided in him, told him her deepest fear she wasn't sure who she was supposed to be anymore. She was trapped by her own position, and all Jack could think about was how different she seemed from the other Xylorians he had met. They were confident, proud, but Lyra was so much more than that. She had asked him for something that Jack didn't yet understand. I'd said it was impossible. But the look in her eyes told him that whatever it was, it meant everything to her. He wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever it might be. But he couldn't back away now. The next day, during a brief interlude in the peace talks, Jack found himself seeking her out. Lyra wasn't in the usual place with the other diplomats. Instead, he found her standing alone near the gardens of the Xylorian palace, staring at the strange flowers that bloomed under the moonlight. It was a quiet space, far from the bustling crowds of diplomats and officials, and Jack felt a sense of calm settle over him as he approached her. Lyra? He called gently. She turned around quickly, her face lighting up at the sight of him. There was something different this time. The nervous energy that had surrounded her before seemed to have faded, replaced by a calm determination. It was almost as if she had made up her mind about something, but Jack wasn't sure what. Jack, she said, her voice warm but hesitant. I've been thinking. About what? Jack asked, walking closer. About what you told me yesterday? Lyra nodded, her eyes focused on the ground for a moment before she met his gaze. Yes, she said softly. I've made a decision. I can't keep living this way. I need to break free. Jack felt a surge of hope. Break free? He repeated, unsure of what she meant. She took a deep breath and took a step closer to him. I need your help, Jack. I know it's impossible, but I can't live this lie anymore. I want to leave Xyloria. I want to escape everything, the politics, the pressure, the expectations. I want to be free. Jack's heart raced. He had known something like this was coming, but hearing her say it out loud made everything feel more real. He had seen the way she had struggled, the way she had been torn between her duties and her own desires, and now she was asking him to help her leave everything behind. Where would you go? Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You can't just leave Xyloria. There are laws. There are consequences. Lyra's eyes darkened, and for a moment she seemed like a different person filled with determination. I don't care about the laws anymore, she said. Can't live this way, Jack. I can't pretend to be someone I'm not. I want to be with you. I don't know how, but I need to try. Jack felt a rush of emotions flood over him. He had never been in a situation like this before. He'd been trained to fight, to protect, but not to navigate the delicate politics of alien worlds, especially not when the stakes were this high. Helping Lyra escape wasn't just about getting her away from the Xylorian authorities. It was about changing the course of her life and the lives of everyone around her. "Lyra," Jack began, his voice shaking slightly. "I don't know if we can pull this off. Xylorian law is strict, and if we get caught—" "I know," she interrupted. "I know the risks. I've thought about it, Jack, and I'm willing to take them. I've lived my whole life following their rules, doing what was expected of me. But I can't do it anymore. I can't keep hiding who I am." Jack looked into her eyes and saw the truth of her words. She was terrified, but she was also stronger than she had ever been. She was willing to risk everything for a chance at something real. "I don't want to lose you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't live a life where I'm not free to make my own choices." Jack took a deep breath. He had never been one to back away from danger, but this was different. This wasn't a battle he could fight with guns or tactics. This was a fight for freedom, for Lyra's future, and for a chance at something they both wanted but could never have in the eyes of Xylorian law. "Okay," Jack said after a long pause. "I'll help you. But we need a plan. A good one. We can't just walk out of here." Lyra's eyes brightened, and for the first time in days, she smiled, truly smiled. "I knew you'd understand." Jack nodded. "But we have to be careful. We can't let anyone find out. Not yet. We need to make sure we have everything in place." Before we make a move, Lyra took a step back, a look of determination on her face. "We'll figure it out, together." Jack couldn't help but feel a rush of relief mixed with fear. This was it, the moment that would change everything. He had agreed to help her, and there was no going back now. The weight of the decision hit him all at once, but he couldn't regret it. He couldn't let Lyra face this alone. The peace talks would continue, and the diplomats would go on pretending everything was normal. But Jack and Lyra knew the truth. The future they both wanted was on the line, and now they had to make it happen. Together, the next few days were a whirlwind for Jack and Lyra. They kept their conversations secret, meeting in quiet corners of the palace and exchanging whispers when no one was looking. Jack felt the weight of their plan on his shoulders, but he also couldn't help the feeling that something important was starting to take shape. Their first task was to find a way off Xyloria without drawing attention. Jack had spent enough time in alien territories to know how to move quietly, but this wasn't just a covert mission. This was their lives at stake. Lyra had made it clear that if they were caught, the consequences would be severe. Her family's influence and the power of the Xylorian government would not let them escape easily. They spent hours talking about their options, trying to come up with a plan that would allow them to slip away unnoticed. Lyra had been reluctant, at first, to even think about asking for help from anyone outside their immediate circle. But Jack knew they couldn't do it alone. "I can't stay here," Lyra said one evening, her eyes filled with a quiet desperation. "Every day I stay, it gets harder. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it becomes. My family will start searching for me soon." Jack nodded. "We need to move fast. I've been in touch with a few trusted contacts on the outside. They'll help us get off the planet." Lyra looked at him, her expression wary. "But can we really trust them? What if they betray us?" "I've worked with them before," Jack replied. "They owe me a favor, and I'm counting on that. But we have to be careful, and we have to be quick. We can't afford to make mistakes." The plan was simple, but risky. They would leave Xyloria on a transport ship disguised as a cargo shipment, and they would make their way to a nearby neutral planet. From there, they would figure out their next steps. But nothing in this plan was guaranteed. If anything went wrong, they could find themselves facing not only the Xylorian authorities, but also the wrath of powerful enemies who would do anything to stop them. As the days passed, Jack noticed how Lyra's nerves began to settle. There was a new fire in her eyes, a determination that made her seem stronger than before. She wasn't just a diplomat anymore. She was a person fighting for her freedom, and Jack admired her for it. But he also saw how much she struggled with the idea of leaving everything behind, the only life she had ever known. The responsibilities she had been forced to bear. One night, as they sat together in the darkened corner of the palace, Lyra spoke in a quiet voice. "Jack, I've been thinking, what about—" Jack asked, turning to face her. I've always lived my life according to what my family and the Xylorian government expected of me, she said softly. I don't know who I am without all that. I've never had the chance to choose for myself. Now that I'm about to leave, I feel both terrified and free. I don't know what will happen, but I know I have to try. Jack's heart ached for her. You're strong, Lyra. You're making a choice for yourself, and that's the hardest thing anyone can do. She smiled faintly. I wish I had your confidence. Jack chuckled softly. I'm not as sure as you think. This isn't going to be easy. But we don't have a choice. They both sat in silence, the weight of their decision hanging between them. Jack thought about the risks, the dangers that awaited them, but he also thought about Lyra's courage. She was willing to give up everything for a chance at freedom. And that was something he couldn't ignore. The day of their escape finally arrived. Jack and Lyra slipped away from the palace under the cover of darkness, making their way to the docking bay where the transport ship was waiting. CK's heart pounded in his chest as he looked over at Lyra, who walked beside him with a sense of calm determination. She was no longer the nervous diplomat he had first met. She was a woman on a mission, and nothing was going to stop her now. When they reached the ship, Jack quickly boarded, ensuring the crew kept quiet about their presence. They had a few hours before the Xylorian authorities would realize Lyra was missing. The ship's engines hummed as they prepared for departure, and Jack felt a mix of excitement and fear. The moment of truth had arrived. Lyra stood by his side, looking out at the distant stars. I can't believe we're doing this, she whispered. Neither can I, Jack admitted. But we're not turning back now. As the ship lifted off from Xyloria's surface, Jack glanced at Lyra, who was watching the planet grow smaller and smaller in the distance. Her face was a mixture of relief and sadness, and he knew that leaving behind everything she had ever known wasn't easy for her. But there was no turning back. This was her chance to live the life she wanted, the life she deserved. For the first time in days, Jack allowed himself to relax. The hardest part was behind them. They were free, for now. But Jack knew that their journey was far from over. They had to stay hidden, keep moving, and make sure no one found them. The Xylorians wouldn't give up easily, and Jack knew that their escape was just the beginning of a much larger fight. But for now, they had made it out, and that was enough. As the stars stretched out before them, Jack felt something he hadn't expected: hope. For the first time in a long time, he felt like they had a chance. And for the first time in a long time, he believed that anything was possible. The silence in the cargo ship was heavy, and Jack could feel the weight of their decision pressing on his shoulders. As the ship cut through the vastness of space, the stars stretched endlessly in front of them, a cold reminder of just how far they had come. Xyloria was now behind them, but the challenges ahead were far from over. Lyra sat quietly beside him, staring out of the small window at the stars. Jack could tell she was deep in thought, her mind racing with what they had just done. For the first time in her life, she was free from the expectations of her family and her people. But freedom came at a cost, and she knew it. How are you holding up? Jack asked softly, breaking the silence. Lyra glanced at him and smiled, though it was a sad smile. I'm still trying to process everything, she said. One moment, I'm standing in the palace, doing what I've been trained to do my whole life, and the next, I'm sitting here on a ship with you, leaving it all behind. Jack nodded, understanding her feelings. I can't imagine what it's like, but I do know this: what we're doing is the right thing. Lyra sighed. I hope so. I've never done anything like this before. I've spent my whole life following the rules, and now I've broken them all. What happens next? Jack smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. We keep moving forward. That's all we can do. For the next few hours, they stayed in silence. The hum of the ship and the stars outside the only sounds. Jack kept an eye on the ship's navigation system, making sure they were on course. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone would find them, someone would come looking for Lyra, and they would stop at nothing to bring her back. Do you think they'll come after us? Lyra asked, her voice breaking into his thoughts. Jack looked at her, his expression serious. I wouldn't put it past them. The Xylorians won't take this lightly. They'll send their best to track us down. And if they catch us, we'll have to deal with the consequences. But you're not scared? She asked, her voice filled with concern. Jack shook his head. I've been in tight spots before, but it's not just about me anymore. It's about you. I won't let anything happen to you, Lyra. Not while I'm here. Ira's eyes softened, and for a moment she seemed to forget the weight of their escape. Thank you, Jack. I don't know if I could have done this without you. Jack smiled. You would have found a way? I'm sure of it. You're stronger than you think. The ship continued its journey, and the days began to blur together. They kept to the small spaces on board, hiding from the outside world. Jack took shifts at the controls, while Lyra worked on keeping their presence as low profile as possible. They couldn't afford to draw attention. If anyone suspected something was wrong, it would only be a matter of time before the Xylorians sent someone to track them down. The ship was heading toward a neutral planet, a place far from the influence of both the Xylorians and the human peacekeeping forces. It was their only chance to regroup, to figure out what to do next. But even as they neared their destination, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The longer they stayed on the ship, the more chances there were for someone to discover them. One evening, as they sat together watching the stars outside, Lyra spoke again, her voice softer than before. Jack, she began, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about moving forward. He turned to her, his expression serious. What are you thinking? I think you're right, she said, her voice steady. We can't keep running forever. We need to make a plan, a real plan. We need to know where we're going and what we're doing. Jack nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. But right now, we need to lay low. Can't risk drawing attention until we're safe. Lyra bit her lip, her mind working through the possibilities. And once we're safe, what then? Then we figure out where we can go from here, Jack said. We don't know what the Xylorians will do, but we need to be ready for anything. Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Do you think we can actually do this? I mean, can we really leave everything behind and make a new life somewhere else? Jack took a deep breath, considering her words. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. They didn't know what the future held, but they couldn't go back. Lyra had made her choice, and Jack had chosen to stand by her. They had to make it work no matter what. We can, Jack said firmly. We'll have to be careful. We'll have to make sacrifices, but we'll do it together, and that's what matters. Lyra smiled, a small but hopeful smile. Together, she echoed, as the ship continued its journey through space. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve settle over him. They had a long road ahead, but as long as they had each other, they had a chance. The future was uncertain, and danger was always just a step behind them. But for the first time, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. They were no longer bound by the rules and expectations of their past. They had a chance to shape their own future, and they would fight for it. The stars outside the windows seemed to promise a new beginning, and Jack knew that no matter what, he would protect Lyra and the future they were about to build. The days on the ship passed slowly, but every moment was filled with tension. Jack could feel the weight of their situation pressing on him, but there was no turning back now. They were on their way to the neutral planet, a place where they could regroup and plan their next move. But even as they neared their destination, Jack knew that danger was still lurking close behind them. Lyra had kept mostly to herself, lost in her thoughts. Jack knew how hard this was for her. She had left everything behind: the family, the status, the expectations. She had made the choice to be free, but it wasn't easy. Jack had seen her struggle with the decision, and he knew it wasn't something she would take lightly. One evening, as the ship drifted through the darkness of space, Jack found Lyra sitting alone near the window, staring out at the stars. He walked over quietly and sat beside her, not saying anything at first. Hey, Jack said softly, breaking the silence. You okay? Lyra didn't look at him right away. She was deep in thought, her eyes focused on the endless expanse of stars. After a long pause, she finally spoke. I'm just thinking about what comes next, she said, her voice quiet. We can't stay on this ship forever. We need a plan. We need to figure out where we go from here. Jack nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. "We'll figure it out," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Once we get to the neutral planet, we can lay low for a while, and we'll find a way to get in touch with some people who can help us." Lyra turned her head to look at him, her eyes filled with concern. "But what if they find us? What if the Zalorians come after us?" Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "If they do, we'll have to be ready. But we can't let fear stop us from moving forward. We've made it this far. We can keep going." Lyra looked down at her hands, clearly lost in her thoughts. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. "I've never been on my own before. I've always had someone telling me what to do, what to think, but now I have to make decisions for myself. I don't know if I'm strong enough." Jack reached out and placed a hand on hers, offering what little comfort he could. "We're stronger than you think, Lyra. You've already made the hardest decision of your life, and you did it for yourself. That's something to be proud of." She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you, Jack. You've been there for me every step of the way." Jack smiled, though there was still a hint of worry in his eyes. "You would have made it on your own, but I'm glad I'm here with you." The stars outside seemed to shimmer a little brighter, and for a brief moment, the weight of their journey lifted. But Jack knew that this was just the calm before the storm, as they were still on the run, still vulnerable to being discovered. The next morning, they arrived at the neutral planet. The planet was a quiet, remote place, perfect for laying low. As the ship touched down on the surface, Jack felt a sense of relief. They had made it this far, but the next step was just as uncertain as the last. They couldn't afford to relax. Not yet. They spent the first few days keeping to themselves, staying hidden in a small rented room in a quiet town. The local population was small, and no one seemed to take much notice of them. Jack and Lyra kept their presence minimal, only venturing out when necessary. "I've been thinking about what we should do next," Jack said one evening as they sat together in their room. "We need to find a way to contact the people who can help us. We can't stay here forever." Lyra nodded, though her face was filled with uncertainty. "But where do we go from here? We don't have much left. My family will send people after me. They'll never stop looking for me." Jack frowned, his mind racing with possibilities. "I've made some contacts with people who owe me favors. I'll start there. They'll help us, even if it means getting off the grid completely." Lyra took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. "I don't know if I can keep running forever. There has to be a way to end this, to stop hiding." Jack reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll find a way. It's not going to be easy, but we've already come this far. We can't give up now." For the next few days, Jack worked to set up a meeting with one of his contacts. They needed information, resources, and a safe way out. But it was clear that the Xylorians weren't the only danger they faced. The world they had escaped from wasn't just about family ties. It was about power, control, and the lengths people would go to maintain it. As they prepared to meet Jack's contact, Lyra's worries deepened. What if this doesn't work? What if we can't keep running? Jack looked at her, his expression serious. "We'll deal with whatever comes. Together." The uncertainty of the future loomed over them like a dark cloud, but Jack refused to let fear control them. They had already made it this far, and they had to believe that they could keep going. As they set out to meet Jack's contact, a sense of determination filled Jack's chest. There were still so many obstacles ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. They were in this together, and he would do whatever it took to protect Lyra, no matter what. The days were passing quickly, but the uncertainty never seemed to fade. Jack and Lyra had been on the neutral planet for almost a week now, hiding in plain sight, trying to stay as invisible as possible. The town they had settled in was quiet and peaceful, but it was only a matter of time before someone came looking for them. The Xylorians were powerful, and Jack knew they wouldn't stop until they had Lyra back. They had met with Jack's contact a few days ago, former ally who had helped him with missions in the past. He had promised them safe passage off the planet, but even that didn't feel like a guarantee. Nothing about their situation was certain. Every choice they made seemed to lead them deeper into unknown territory. That afternoon, Jack and Lyra sat together on a bench in the small park near their rented room. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the town, but the peace felt fragile. Every time Jack looked at Lyra, he saw the weight of their choices on her shoulders. Now, She had left everything behind for a chance at freedom, but the cost of that freedom was high. "Do you ever think about going back?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. Lyra turned to him, surprised by the question. "Back?" she asked softly. "Back to Xyloria?" Jack nodded, though he could see the hesitation in her eyes. "I know it's a hard question, but do you ever wonder if you made the right choice?" Lyra looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. "Slightly, I don't know," she said quietly. "Sometimes I think about everything I left behind, the life I could have had if I'd stayed. But then I remember how trapped I felt, how I couldn't be myself. I couldn't live under their rules. Anymore, I don't think I could go back, even if I wanted to." Jack watched her, feeling a deep sense of understanding. He had never been forced into the kind of position she had, but he knew what it was like to feel trapped by circumstances beyond your control. "I get it," Jack said gently. "I don't think I could go back either, not after everything we've been through." They sat in silence again, the weight of their conversation lingering in the air. Jack knew they couldn't stay on the planet much longer. His contact had arranged for them to leave in a few days, but even that felt uncertain. They had no idea where they were going next, only that they had to keep moving. The Xylorians wouldn't give up, and they needed to stay one step ahead. Later that evening, Jack and Lyra prepared to meet with the contact again. The meeting would be their chance to leave the planet and move to a safer location, but even as they prepared, Jack felt a gnawing sense of unease. Nothing was ever as simple as it seemed, and they both knew that there were risks they hadn't even considered yet. "We'll be careful," Lyra said, as they walked through the dark streets. "We can't afford any mistakes." "I know," Jack replied, his voice low. "But sometimes things don't go as planned. We just have to be ready for whatever happens."
When?
They arrived at the meeting place, a small, quiet cafe on the edge of town. They found the contact waiting for them. He was an older man, with gray hair and a serious expression. Jack had worked with him before, and he trusted him, but even trust didn't come without its doubts. In their line of work, trust could be fleeting, and people could change when the stakes were high. "Everything's set," the contact said when they sat down. "The ship will be ready in 2 days. We'll be able to leave then, no problem." Jack felt a brief sense of relief, but it was short-lived. "What about the Xylorians?" he asked. "Are we safe?" The contact hesitated, his gaze flicking toward the door. "Safe," he said, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "There's no such thing as safe when you're on the run, but we've made arrangements. You'll be out of here before they have a chance to catch up to you. I've already paid off the right people to make sure you're not followed." Jack nodded, but the unease didn't go away. It was all too easy to believe that things were under control. They'd made it this far. They couldn't afford to let their guard down now. Lyra reached for Jack's hand beneath the table, her grip tight and anxious. "What if it's a trap?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Jack looked at her, his heart heavy. "We'll be ready," he said quietly. "If it is a trap, we'll deal with it. But we can't keep living in fear. We have to take this chance." The contact stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'll see you in 2 days," he said. "Don't be late. The longer you wait, the greater the risk." As they left the cafe, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He had spent years working in dangerous situations, but this felt different. Stakes were higher now, and there was no room for mistakes. Back at their room, Jack paced the small space, while Lyra sat on the bed, her hands folded in her lap. The walls felt like they were closing in on them, and Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. They were close to freedom, but nothing was guaranteed. "I'll keep watch tonight," Jack said, stopping in front of her. "You? Get some rest. We need to be ready for anything." Lyra nodded, though her eyes were filled with worry. "I'm scared, Jack." "I know," he said softly. "But we're in this together, and we're getting out of here, no matter what." As Lyra lay down, Jack stood by the window, his eyes scanning the dark streets outside. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anything happen to her. He'd made a promise, and he intended to keep it. The night stretched on, but Jack remained vigilant. Couldn't afford to relax not when they were so close to freedom. And he wouldn't stop. Fighting for it, not for a second.